Let's start with Matovu on page 290. It's not on the service order, so we'll have to wing that one. Matovu on page 290.
So we'll do kind of the round tune, and if anyone feels like joining in on a round, Rabbi, you're welcome to. Matovu, Halecha Yaakov, Mishkenotecha Yisrael, Matovu, Halecha Yaakov,
Let us continue with the Chatzi Kaddish on page 312. Page 313. And let us join in prayer on page 317. O God, inspiration and guide for all, you have spoken in 1,000 tongues for us to hear, in every land and every age. Your children have heard you and imagined you in separate ways, and yet, O God, you are one unifier of humanity. We give thanks for the sages and teachers who bring us understanding of your will. Gratefully, we recall the lawgivers and prophets, the psalmists and sages of Israel, and joyfully remember that from the dawn of Israel's life, we would turn to you and find purpose. May the teachings of our ancestors live on in our minds, and their passion for righteousness stir our hearts. Help us to live so that our daily conduct reveals the beauty and wisdom of your truth. Baruch atah Adonai, habocher be'amo Yisrael be'ahava. Please rise for the Shema, page 318.
Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad. Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad. Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad. Baruch Shem Kevod Malchuto, Le'olam Va'ed. Baruch Shem Kevod Malchuto, Le'olam Va'ed. Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad. Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad.
Be seated, and let us join in the reading of the V'ahavta together on page 319, V'ahavta. V'ahavta et Adonai Elohecha b'chol levavcha u'v'chol nafshecha u'v'chol me'odecha v'hayu hadvarim ha'ele asher anochi mitzavcha hayom al levavecha v'shinantam levanecha v'dibarta bam v'shivtecha b'veitecha v'lechtecha v'derech v'shochbecha uv'kumecha, u'kshartam leot al yadecha, v'hayu letotafot bein einecha, u'chtavtam al mezuzot beitecha u'visharecha, lema'an tizkeru v'yasitem et kol mitzvotai, v'item kadoshim lelohechem, Ani Adonai Elohechem, asher hotzeti etchem me'eretz Mitzrayim, lihiyot lachem le'Elohim, Ani Adonai Elohechem. And before we continue, I just wanted to point out, and I know some of you may know this, but if you look into the Hebrew, you'll see these various funny markings either below the letter or above the letter. So on the V'ahavta, you have sort of a half a square, and then over the tav you have these two dots, and you'll see that on the next word you see sort of a little squiggly line under the tav on it, and then you have the same square on the same half square on Adonai. And then an upside down caret under the hay. Those are, that was developed, a system of accents. And it was developed by the Masoretes at a time when Biblical Hebrew was no longer the spoken language. In Israel, there was back during the Second Temple period, they didn't speak Hebrew. They spoke I think they spoke Aramaic, if I'm not mistaken. In fact, not that you should go and run off and see this movie, but in The Passion of the Christ, the Mel Gibson horrible film, I think they're speaking Aramaic, and there's a translation at the bottom, and that was the authentic language that they spoke. So biblical Hebrew was no longer a spoken language. So the problem was, since the Torah is in Hebrew, how do we know where the accents fall? I mean, for example, is it football or is it football? I mean, if you didn't hear the language, if you weren't speaking it, you wouldn't know where the accents were. So that's what those little markings are for. It tells us where the accents are, and it tells us not to slur certain vowels. So if you look at the first word, you see under the aleph, the ah, right? You have a vowel for those that, I think most people here are either learning to read Hebrew or they're excited about learning how to read Hebrew, one or the other. And so underneath that second letter, you see this little thing. And what that's designed to do is to tell you to make sure that you enunciate that vowel. The accent doesn't fall there, but it also serves the purpose, since you have two consecutive vowels. Underneath, you have a vowel underneath the aleph, and you have a hey. Make sure you enunciate ve'ahavta. You follow that so far? In other words, because you could say ve'afta, because the tendency in linguistics is to shorten words. an axiom in linguistics. That's about the sum total of my knowledge of linguistics, but that's, so the tendency is to slur vowels. And the problem with that is, since it is Lashon Kodesh, since it's holy language, we want to make sure that every letter, every vowel is enunciated properly. And also, so to the accents, the ahafta, okay, the accent is on the very last syllable, because you have those two dots above. The ahafta is really the correct pronunciation. The ahafta. Yeah.
Just gonna ask, for the musicians among us who are learning Hebrew,
Mm-hmm.
it is also trope marks, which
Right,
they
exactly.
are just beginning to learn from me.
Yes, when you see that I'm reading the Torah, for example, I'm sort of glancing over there. It's not so much to make sure I get the words right, though that's also very important. I'm looking at the trope notes, which you're supposed to memorize, but I don't memorize. I've done it for such a long time. I know pretty much the phrasing, because you do something long enough, you get, I kind of know what to expect. But sometimes you don't, and so what I'm really looking for is the correct accents and the correct melody. Exactly. And there's different cantillations for different occasions. So, for example, the cantillation for today is V'ahavta et Hashem Elokecha b'chol levavcha u'v'chol nafshecha u'v'chol me'odecha. Now, there's different tropes depending upon the region that you come from. We use what's called the Bender trope. That's not the trope I learned. It's similar, but it's not exact. There's certain differences. I like my trope better because it is better. That's no, that's
Ann
not.
and I were just talking about this at breakfast, actually.
Right. No, it actually, I think melodically it works better, but I was taught by my teacher who came from a certain part of Eastern Europe, and that was the cantillation that
Do
they.
the difference so we can hear it.
Yeah, so in the Binder trope, what we do in Reform Judaism, you do it. V'ahavta et Adonai Elohecha b'chol levavcha u'v'chol nafshecha u'v'chol me'odecha. Is that right? Close.
Yeah, that's close.
Yeah, go ahead, you do it precisely. Yeah, go
I
ahead.
have to change the keys a little bit. V'ahavta et Adonai Elohecha b'kol levecha v'kol nafshecha v'kol me'odecha.
Okay.
The
So
difference
my
also-
trope is like this.
Right.
V'ahavta et Adonai Elohecha b'chol levavcha u'v'chol nafshecha u'v'chol me'odecha. I think mine
Difference.
flows better, but that's just.
It's just a little bit, there's not too much of this.
Yeah, there's not as much up
And
and
the
down.
etnata you do
Yeah.
is beautiful.
Well, my,
And we don't do that here.
well,
Which one is from this prayer from the Torah? How is that one chanted?
exactly the way we're doing it.
The way you just did it, or the way we're doing
Well,
it?
it
Well,
would
it depends on
depend,
the
it would
region.
depend on the reader. So for example, if the reader was doing the Reform trope, that would be the way that we chant it in the temple.
Because you sound just like a Torah portion. that you just did.
Because that's how he reads.
Yeah, right.
What
Now,
if we had someone from a different region?
Now-
Right.
now for the High Holy Days, the cantillation changes. So I go. V'ahavta et Adonai Elohecha b'chol levavcha u'v'chol nafshecha u'v'chol me'odecha. If I was singing for the High Holy Days, you can hear that it's a little more, somber, a little more. It's not as melodic in a certain way. It also goes from a minor key, I think, to a major. It always ends on a major key. When the Sof Pasuk is always in a major, whereas in Torah cantillation on Shabbat, it's always just a major key. It never switches into a minor key. Whereas I think the High Holy Day trope actually. Vadonai pakaretzah kasher amar vayasar Hashem l'sara kasher diber vatar vateled Sarah liAvraham bein niskunav lamoed asher diber oto Elokim. It's
You
much
can hear
more.
the difference, absolutely.
Yeah, I mean, you can hear it. Don't ask me to do Esther, that's wild.
I was gonna ask you
No,
to do.
no, we have to move on in the service. I could go on in this,
That's okay.
this could be the entire
That's okay.
service.
That's-
Why don't we turn to page 323 and we'll begin with Tefillah.
Adonai sevatai tivta ufia hita hilatecha. Adonai, open up my lips that my mouth may declare your praise. Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu, v'Elohei Avotenu v'Imotenu, Elohei Abraham, Elohei Yitzchak, Elohei Yaakov, Elohei Sarah, Elohei Rivka, Elohei Rachel, Elohei Leah, Ha'el Hagadol Hagibor v'Nahara, Elyon, Gomer Chasadim Tovim, V'Gonei Hakol, V'Socher Hasevot v'Imahot, U'Mevii Geulah Livnei B'neihem, Leman Shemo B'Yahava, Melech Ozer, U'Moshiach U'Magen, Baruch atah Adonai, Magen Avraham, V'Yitzrat Zerah. Atah Gibor Le'olam Adonai, Mikayei HaKol atah, Rav le'Hoshia. Mikakel Kaim Bekesed, Mikayei HaKol Berachamim Rabim, Somev Noflim V'Rofei Cholim, Umatir Asurim, Umechayem Emunato, Lishenei Afar, Michal Mocha Gevurot, Umidom Elach, Melech Emit Umechayeh, Umatzmiach Yeshua, Ne'eman Hatal Yachayot HaKol, Baruch atah Adonai, Mikayei HaKol.
Continue with the Kedusha, page 326.
נקדש את שמך בעולם, כשם שמקדישים אותו בשמי מרום, ככתוב היה נביאך, וקרא זה ואמר, קדוש קדוש קדוש, אדוני צבאות, מלוך הארץ, כבודו. אדיר אדירנו אדוני, אדוננו בדשמך בכל הארץ, ברוך כבוד אדוני ממקומו. אחד אלוהינו, הוא אבינו ומלכנו, הוא מושיענו והוא ישמיענו, ברחמיו להניחו חיל. אני אדוני אלוהיכם, ימלוך אדוני לעולם, אלוהי ציון.
silently in the prayer book through page 300 and to page 337. You may either stand or you may be seated, of course, as is your tradition. And we continue with either Yiyul Ratzon or Oseh Shalom, page 337.
We'll do Oseh Shalom. Oseh Shalom bimromav v'yaseh Shalom aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael ve'imeru Amen.
And we're going to continue now with our Torah service. Would anyone like to come up and open the ark and carry the Torah? Don't all jump up at one time. Thank you, Nate.
We've got 2 building hymns.
You will soon.
Thank you.
Please rise. Page 364, Ki Mitzion Tetzei Torah.
Ki mitzion tetzei Torah, ki mitzion tetzei Torah, udevar Adonai merushalayim, Baruch Shem Ton Torah, Torah, Baruch Shem Ton
Page 366.
Torah, Torah, Le'amo Yisrael, Bekedushato. Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu,
השמיים והארץ, בכל השמיים והארץ, לך אדוני המלאכה, והעמיד מעשה לכל הראש. You may be seated. To roll it to the right place. Well, we're nearing, as you can see, we're nearing the end of the Torah. It's always a little more complicated to roll it. The reading of the Torah may be found on page 1541. And as is our tradition, everybody gets an aliyah. Just have people come up. This is a wonderful portion that we should maybe have a short discussion on afterwards, because it does involve choice. It's very difficult to have Judaism be a coherent philosophy, even from the Torah. It's difficult. There's all kinds of contradictory passages. You'll see in one passage a certain approach, a certain philosophy, and then seems to militate against it. You have a compassionate God, and then you have an angry God. It's full of those sort of dialectics, those sort of contradictions. I mean, I won't say contradictions, but opposite views about matters of life and so forth. But here in Nitzavim Vayelech, which we will read on Yom Kippur, we'll read this particular portion. But in Nitzavim Vayelech, you have this very famous passage, and I think we read it today. And there, that I've set before you today, life and death, the blessing and curse, and so forth. And the admonition is to choose life. In other words, the choice to live well. That fundamentally, each individual has a choice to choose life in a positive way, or choose death. And that sort of mirrors, if you think about it, that mirrors existential philosophy. So this text was really ahead of its time in that regard, that at some fundamental level, the individual has to choose the kind of life that they wish to lead and work towards that endeavor. Doesn't always go smoothly and so forth, and the Torah doesn't promise that. But in this portion, having laid out the commandments, the general tenor of belief in God, the tenets of mitzvot, of doing acts that are charitable, that promote justice, that promote commitment to our sacred history, and service to God. Those are fundamental choices that as Jews we are told to make, and in some respects mirrors creation, where human beings are given that freedom of choice. Right, so we can follow the reading, and maybe if we have time, we'll have a little discussion afterwards. Page 1541, and it begins, I think, on verse. It begins with Ki ha-mitzvah hazot. Keep going. Where is it? Sure. Okay. Yes, we will do that. Verse 11, chapter 30, verse 11. Okay. So let's see, normally we go from left to right, but maybe we'll change it around this time. So Molly and Heidi, you want to take the first Aliyah? We're going to go Ki ha-mitzvah to here. Okay. No, they have to stay there. That's it.
Baruch Adonai HaMevorach.
Baruch Adonai Baruch Le'olam Va'ed.
Baruch Adonai HaMevorach Le'olam Va'ed. Baruch Atah Adonai Eloheinu Melech HaOlam. Asher bahar banu mikol ha'amim, v'natan lanu et Torato. Baruch atah Adonai, noten ha'Torah.
Amen. Ki ha-mitzvah hazot asher anochi mitzavcha hayom lo nifleit hi mimcha v'lo rechoka hi lo vashamayim hi lemor mi ya'aleh lanu hashamayima vayikachecha lanu v'yishmienu otav v'na'asena v'lo me'ever layam hi lemor mi ya'avor lanu al ever hayam vayikachecha lanu v'yishmienu otav v'na'asena ki karov elecha hadavar ma'od beficha uvavacha li'asoto.
Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu melech haolam, asher natan lanu Torah emet, v'chayei olam natav v'duchenu. Baruch atah Adonai, noten ha'Torah.
The second Aliyah, why don't we get Nate and Kate and Cody and come up?
We're on verse 15 now.
Yeah.
My kids.
Baruch Adonai HaMevorach.
Baruch Adonai Baruch Le'olam Va'ed.
Baruch Adonai HaMevorach Le'olam Va'ed. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu Melech HaOlam. Asher bachar banu mikol ha'amim v'natan lanu et Torato. Baruch atah Adonai noten ha'Torah.
Amen. Natati lefanecha hayom et hachayim v'et hatov v'et hamavet v'et hara asher anochi mitzavcha hayom li'ahava et Adonai Elohecha lalechet b'derachav v'lishmor mitzvotav v'chukotav u'mishpatav v'chayita v'ravita uverachacha Adonai Elohecha ba'aretz asher ata v'shama l'rishta.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher natan lanu Torah emet v'chayei olam natav b'dochenu. Baruch atah Adonai noten ha'Torah.
Tamdu Shlishi. Oh, last group.
Everyone who's
Ann
left.
and, Jevin and Ann.
17. We're on verse 17 next. If you're following in Torah.
That's okay.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah,
No.
this is gonna have to get fixed.
Yeah.
This is so long.
Where you can see, I can see it.
Baruch hu et Adonai Hamdollah. No, but we have to start with that. That's just great. Baruch hu. Right there. Baruch hu et Adonai Hamdollah. Baruch Adonai Hamdollah le'olam va'ed.
Baruch Adonai Hamburach Leolam Vaed. Baruch Atah Adonai Eloheinu Melech Haolam Asher Bachar Banu Mikol Hamim V'natan Lanu Et Torato. Baruch Atah Adonai Noten HaTorah.
Amen. Ve'im yifne levavecha v'lo tishma v'nidachta v'hishtachavita le'elohim acherim v'avaretam higarati lachem hayom ki ovo tovedun lo ta'arichun yomim al ha'adama asher ata over et hayarden lavo shamal rishta ha'idoti vachem hayom et hashamayim v'et ha'aretz achayim v'hamavet natati lefanecha habracha v'haklala uvacharta b'chayim למען תחיה אתה וזרעך לאהבה את אדוני אלוהיך לשמוע בקולו ודבקה בו כי הוא חייך ויארך ימיך לשבת על האדמה אשר נשבע אדוני לאבותיך לאברהם ליצחק וליעקב לתת לכם.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher natan lanu Torah emet v'chayei olam nata betokenu. Baruch atah Adonai noten haTorah. Amen.
It's on your side. You can pull it down. You can pull it on your side.
Stuck up here.
Yeah. Pull it down on that side. This is what we call struggling with the Torah.
Wrestling with the Torah.
Wrestling with the Torah is what our other Gabbai used to say. There we go. Yeah, indeed. Why they didn't make it a little wider at the bottom? Well,
Okay, we're all set.
it's beautiful anyway. There you go.
We were joined up here by a spider, so we now have 14 in our minion. Okay, we're going to continue with the Yahalalu, and that is on page 374. Please rise.
Tehillah lechol chasidah, Livnei Israel am kerovo. Hallelujah, hallelujah. Etz chaim hi lemata zikimba, v'tom keha meushar derachecha darkei noam, v'chol netivotecha shalom. Hashivenu Adonai elecha v'nashuva Chadesh, Chadesh Yameinu, Chadesh Yameinu, Kekedem.
No, you may be seated. I think this Torah portion has so many rich ideas that what I'd like to do is to get your insights into just the short portion that we read. And before we do that, let me just sort of read it out loud here. Beginning with verse 11. This is what we read in the Hebrew, and then I'd like to open this up for discussion because it's such a meaningful verse, particularly as we get close to Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. So I have an old JPS translation, and it's good enough for our purposes. For this commandment which I command thee this day, it is not too hard for thee, neither is it far off. It is not in heaven that thou shouldst say, who shall go up for us to heaven, and bring it unto us, and make us to hear it, that we may do it? Neither is it beyond the sea that thou shouldst say, who shall go over the sea for us, and bring it unto us, and make us to hear it, that we may do it? But the word is very nigh unto thee, in thy mouth and in thy heart, that thou mayest do it. See, I have set before thee this day life and good, and death and evil. And then I command thee this day to love the Lord thy God, to walk in God's ways, to keep God's commandments and God's statutes and his ordinances. I've changed the his to God. Then thou shalt live and multiply, and the Lord thy God shall bless thee in the land whither thou goest in to possess it. But if thy heart turn away, and thou wilt not hear, but shall be drawn away and worship other gods and serve them, I declare you this day that you shall surely perish. You shall not prolong your days upon the land whither thou passest over the Jordan to go in to possess it. I call heaven and earth to witness against you this day that I have set before thee life and death, the blessing and the curse. Therefore choose life that thou mayest live, thou and thy seed, to love God, to hearken to God's voice, to cleave unto God, for that is thy life and the length of thy days, that thou mayst dwell in the land which God swore unto thy fathers, to Abraham, to Isaac, and to Jacob, to give to them. So what impresses you about this particular section, and why might it be a section that was chosen in the Reform movement, by the way, the Reform movement, to read on Yom Kippur? Any ideas, any thoughts, any reactions to this?
Yeah, for me, it's God doesn't do it for you.
Yeah,
Which is what I keep talking about all the time.
and it's important, right?
Yeah, that it's you. God has given us the ability to do what we want, how we want to do it.
Yeah.
If we don't want to do it, we've got the world we're in now.
me, it's a, Torah isn't in heaven, it's down here with us.
Torah's not in heaven, it's not something far away.
It's right.
Sometimes we make it too complicated.
Yeah.
You know, the Talmud and all of that. There's a joke I told probably a couple of years ago, and I'll tell it again. The children of Israel prayed up to God to take back all the laws because it's too complicated. It's just too hard. It's just too difficult. And God said, "Okay, bring everything you have to Mount Sinai, and I'll take back." Okay, so they bring all their books. They bring the Talmud and Midrash and all this stuff, and hand comes out of the sky and takes back the Talmud, takes back everything except the Torah. And God says, they said, "Why don't you take this one? This is what I gave to you. The rest of that stuff, that's what you did. That's all your stuff. That's what you wanted to take back." But in other words, the idea, of course, is the Torah is much simpler sometimes than we make it. And I think that builds a little bit on your point, Nate, about it. It's right before you. You can do this. It's not that hard. It's not that complicated. Seems like it sometimes. We make it complicated, but it's not that complicated.
The first sentence too, is that where they say, it's not in heaven, which to me is the real difference between Judaism and Christianity. We do in certain segments, the world to come, but that's not what we're here for.
Right. Yeah, there's no mention here. The only reward is that so you and your children can live on the land. And I read that also, not just for Israel, but for all countries. I'm not talking about keeping kosher or all that kind of stuff, but the essences of what's in the Torah, the stuff that all nations should really live by, those principles. And I think it carries over as a fundamental truth for all countries. If you want to live long, if you want to have a prosperous society, the Torah is not a bad place to look at. And it's not in the heavens. Yeah, wonderful point. Others?
Is this the portion of the blessings and the curses, or not?
No, we read that
So last week?
last week, yeah. The curses, yeah, that's terrible.
Those are the ones you're supposed to whisper.
Yeah, you're supposed to whisper, I'm supposed to say them out loud.
Yeah.
Ward off the evil spirits. I like the juxtaposition of evil and death and good and life. I like that juxtaposition because then you don't have to interpret literally. You're able to really interpret life in terms of quality, a good life. What constitutes a good life? What constitutes a bad life, an evil life? And Moses at the end, this is the end of summation. He's simplifying things for the rest of us. Yeah.
But this isn't saying that if you want to commit suicide, go ahead and do it.
No.
It says the opposite, nothing else.
So no, but it says if you want, choose death. But I think it means if you don't do the right things and everything,
Exactly.
then you've
Might as
chosen
well.
death.
Yeah.
Is that correct?
Yeah, and I would say that suicide, that in Judaism you really can't choose suicide. It's very difficult. Why? Because you have to commit suicide under no duress or under no compulsion. It has to be a true exercise of free will. Notice that the existentialists early on, none of them committed suicide. I don't think any of the early Sartre, I don't think he committed suicide. And that was one of the questions, of course, that's one of the questions that existentialists answer. Why not? So, even they chose, at the end of the day, chose life. But you're absolutely, suicide today, I think, would be very difficult. Back in the old days, when a person committed suicide, they couldn't be buried in a Jewish cemetery. They were buried outside. But now that we know that suicide is a very complicated form, a very complicated expression of a mental illness, and that really compromises free will substantially. from what we're knowing now about the human mind, about the brain, about how that works and so forth, I don't think any argument can really be made that a person commits suicide as understood in the Torah, or even as understood by most religious faiths. But even in my time, not that long ago, 30, 40 years ago, I had a cousin who committed suicide, who they ruled was a suicide, and he was buried outside. But I think that's a mistake. I mean, my own rabbinic opinion is that that's a mistake. And I have texts that can show that. Yeah. I mean, I'm not talking about, oh, today, it's more modern and we should be more open and liberal. No, I'm talking in terms of actual halakha,
Well, it's the family that gets punished.
Yeah.
When they're buried outside. That's who's left to be punished. They've already been punished.
Yeah,
By
the
losing their
exercise
loved
of suicide has to be by free will. And by definition, by what we know today in cultural norms, suicide is really an expression of a mental illness. And free will is seriously compromised.
I think the first suicide buried in our cemetery, like in the 70s.
Yeah.
And were reformed.
Yeah.
They still would.
They wouldn't do that. I think you'd get a different result today. At least in this rabbi, you would get a much different result. I mean, I understand in the 70s why they did that. We still weren't there yet in terms of understanding mental illness. We were just beginning to become a little more enlightened, about, particularly about the relationship between brain function and its impact on behavior. We have a better, we're still in the dark ages, and you would know better than I. Back then, to some extent, we didn't have the knowledge that we have today.
No, they were still doing frontal lobotomies,
No kidding, right?
electric shock
Yeah.
therapy.
Yeah,
Oh, yeah, that was a big deal. It's
How
true in the
barbaric.
70s, yeah.
How barbaric.
But now we've graduated to psilocybin, mushrooms.
Yeah, they're bringing shrooms back.
That's true.
That may be a step in the right
I just
direction.
read a clinical study that shows that taking one dose of psilocybin, I forget how many milligrams it is, and having a therapist, present in case things go bad, relief from major depression. Is 43 days compared to a placebo, where there was no significant difference based upon that. How long is that going to last? But they are finding that psilocybin can be very helpful, where all other types of medication and talk therapy have proven to be, just resistant to a certain type of depression. So again, our understanding of brain function, and people that have major depression, clinical, where they can't get out of bed, they can't function, and that can lead to suicide. And you're always assessing for that in the context,
Marijuana, they found this works pretty good too.
Yeah.
For some people in depression.
Yeah, we don't think about anything when
Yeah, right. Well, you walk around with a smile on your face.
That's right.
why not?
That's right.
Yeah.
Really, really hungry.
But you can get the same effect, you can get the same effect by coming here and davening on Shabbat.
Absolutely.
You don't need grass, you don't need psilocybin, you just come here on Shabbat and
Just imagine
It's
if we
good
had
for the
gummies here. If you have a few gummies, come to service. We'd be
We could stay all day.
Yeah, keep going, Rabbi.
Yeah, read the whole.
I'm gonna tell you something, I've had a few board meetings in my time where we could have used some of that.
Or maybe they were on.
Present board excluded. No, here, I'm just teasing. Yes, Ann, you had some ideas, please.
It's not that I disagree, I don't disagree with what this says,
Mhm.
because I think if you do live a good life, things are definitely gonna go better for you if you don't. But what about the case where bad things happen to good people? I know this is an issue of discussion
Sure.
in religion.
Yeah, I texted a little bit about that last night, right? in the music world, I mean, how does a Beethoven who just, he wasn't pure, he didn't go to church every Sunday, I bet, from what we know a little bit, you know, he liked to drink, he liked to go to pubs, and he lived a pretty hard life, so to speak. Am I wrong on this? Or, you know, correct me? Yeah, and yet he could write this great music. I mean, where did that come from? You know, just but yeah, I don't know if there's a good answer. The only answer is that the reward is in the doing of itself, and that it's not a protective factor in a bad thing happening, because life is just full of that. But it can be helpful in terms of getting through bad circumstances if you understand that the mitzvot, or that these commandments, or Moses is suggesting to a people, can be helpful when bad things do occur. It's not, even though the Torah talks about that, you know, it talks about, well, you do this and everything, you eat and be satisfied and all of this, and it doesn't always work out that way. That's the paradox. You're absolutely correct.
How about your quote from Ordinary People? It's right on. I think it's Ordinary People, one I didn't see.
Oh yeah, bad things happen even when people are careful. That was have you seen the film Ordinary People? Anybody seen it? Very old movie. If you haven't seen it, it's the greatest therapy movie ever made. But if you like psychotherapy, it's about a young boy who attempts suicide, real suicide. It's in a mental hospital, gets released, and then family dynamics, and he goes to a psychotherapist who helps him deal with the trauma that occurred, and the kid has blamed himself for the death of his older brother. He's carrying this guilt, and one of the things he says in session is, if we'd only been careful, if only turned in, if it was a boating accident, if only we turned in when the storm, when we could see when things were going right, if only we'd done that. And the therapist says, bad things happen even when people are careful. I don't have a better answer. That may not be satisfactory for what you're saying, but the strength. So here's something that you can hang your hat on, is that it is fascinating that the book of Job is in the biblical canon. I mean, our sages chose the books that became part of our Tanakh, and they included the book of Job. They included the Akedah, and they could have left it out. They didn't have to put it in. There's nothing compelling. Well, the Torah, that they couldn't change. But as far as what was going to be after the Torah, that they could. And they had the book of Job in front of them. The Jewish biblical canon was closed somewhere between 200 and 250 BCE, and Job is thought to have been written somewhere around 300 to 400 BCE. And so the strength of Judaism is the fact that a book like that is included. Because that's the question. How can Job be punished? But the end of the story, right? The end of the story is he's restored. God gives him all these camels, he gives him all these donkeys, and all this grain, and all this stuff. And I calculated what he got in compensatory damages. I looked up, what does a camel go for today? What does a camel cost? And he got 7,000.
You really did this.
I did this.
He has a chart.
How much do donkeys cost? He got $81 million for his trouble.
Do you think that was enough? 81 million for everything he's suffered.
Put your attorney hat on for a minute.
As a good plaintiff's lawyer would say, it's never enough.
There you go.
I'm joking, obviously I'm joking, but I think that ending is put on there is almost a joke at the end. So I call it a Hollywood ending because it's 42 chapters, and that's the last chapter, the last 4 or 5 verses. The real thrust of the book is how do we deal with terrible things happening that aren't deserved.
And some people who read things too literally will feel like, God deserted them in some way or something.
That's right.
They even will lose their religion, whatever their religion is.
Yeah. If you read the book Death and Dying, they talk about certain stages of grieving by Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, and one of the stages is bargaining. First one is, I guess, denial, and then another one is like anger, and then another one is bargaining. okay, God, if you take away my cancer, I promise I'll do X. And then that's part, and that's one of the stages, yeah. So there is that turning to God. I mean, probably the one who lives a real paradoxical life on that question was Elie Wiesel. Or people who are, or my rabbi, who survived the horrors of the Holocaust, lost his entire family, stood by a window and just by accident, I mean, just by fate, his sister, who was standing at the same window, was shot, and he survived. And he escaped, and he lived, he could speak German, and he was very fluent in languages, and he survived. You know, they invaded Poland at 41, so he was on the run and ended up in a labor camp for 3 or 4 years or something, and then came to the United States, and he was an Orthodox Jew. I mean, he was very frum, not very frum, he wasn't very frum, but he was, you know, he never turned away. He didn't, you know, and Ray Cantor, the Cantor that I had when I was first starting out as a rabbi in a conservative congregation, he was a survivor. I mean, he was in a labor camp in Częstochowa, Poland, and he chanted the high holy days like he wouldn't, you know, like he wouldn't believe. I mean, it was unbelievable. So there's these, and of course, Elie Wiesel. Elie Wiesel, I mean, he described what he went through, and he was an observing Jew. I mean, he was observant. He had to get a dispensation. I don't know if you know the story about the World Series. No? So we got a phone call from the then mayor when the Yankees were in the World Series, and he was going to throw out the first pitch. They wanted to honor him. The problem was it was on a Friday night. It was on a Friday night. So he called his rabbi. So his son was, Dad, you gotta go. And so his son, really, this is a true story. And I guess he called his rabbi and he got a special, whatever, you know, special dispensation, I don't know. Yeah, and he went out and threw the first pitch. But that's a real contradiction. I mean, this is a man who, you know, anyone who went to Auschwitz, you know, that's beyond the Jovian experience, you know. And yet here we have these people. We had some that didn't go that way. Some that went the other direction, just got off the boat and said, this is it, I'm done with that. I don't ever want to go back to that. It's just, you know, you can't say who's right and wrong in those circumstances. There is no real right or wrong.
I think we as humans try to, you know, figure all that out, and it really can't be figured out.
Right.
You know, that's part of it.
Don't we live a good life for the sake of living a good life?
Exactly.
And
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And that's what that text says, really. You know, that you'll live, you know, that of course there is that reward about living a long time on the land I swore. Okay, but if you omit that for a second, then you really deconstruct the text. It's about living what the Torah would describe philosophically as a good life. It's hard. It's not easy to do it. Very, very hard.
When I lived in Spot, very, very Orthodox community, extremely Orthodox community that I was in. And if you were sick, they would send someone out to check to make sure your mezuzah was upright correctly. Or they would look for reasons that you must have done something wrong in the mitzvot to have earned that, which is, for me, crazy. But, you know, so I think everybody searches for that answer, and, you know, you just have to keep it simple.
Yeah.
Millions of people, can anybody ever conceive that God is worried about billions of people every single second of every single day? That's ridiculous. He didn't cause anything. He gave us all this. Do it. Go do it. Now, if good things happen, that's up to you. If bad things happen to you, God didn't give you cancer. It's ridiculous.
Yeah, I mean,
I agree with you.
I kind of think of it almost like, you know, how you're a composition of trillions of cells, but you can't like care for every little cell in your body. You know, about some cell here, like, you know, it's just.
We are finite creatures, and that's a very hard thing to accept. That's very hard thing.
Yeah.
And that's why it's framed, Achayim V'Hamavet, life and death. I mean, that's going to happen.
But isn't it miraculous that he gave us this body?
That's right.
And how well it does work?
Sometimes, but he gave us this. I mean, it's unbelievable, this body.
You're right,
Ah,
100%.
You couldn't build a machine. Well, I shouldn't say that. They're starting to do it now.
They're trying, but hopefully we won't be here to see the end result.
Seriously, and be able to progress to where we are now. I mean, and for the people to write the Torah, that's what blows my mind.
Yeah.
Read that, well, how many years? 1,500 years ago?
Yeah, well, I mean, yeah, the Torah is, according to scholars, is in its final form, for sure, by about 525 BCE. And I mean, my graduate advisor thinks it was before the destruction of the first temple that the Torah was indeed complete by that time.
Right,
He thinks it's earlier.
Write these most beautiful words and the idea behind it.
That's right.
I mean, just,
Divine, isn't it?
yeah.
Agreed. Well, we could go on for a long time. I don't want to try to conclude the service.
This was nice, thank you.
That was very nice, very enlightening for me. Thank you. By the way, you all, if next Saturday, you want to come strolling in late for Rosh Hashanah, don't wait. Or you decide to go out and have a glass of wine during my sermon, no problem.
There's no breakfast next Saturday.
No breakfast? Only for people that come on Shabbat morning. A special breakfast for Shabbat goers only.
Only, right, and they have to know the password to get in the library.
There you go. There you go. Okay. Please rise for the Alena. We'll continue page 586.
Alleinu l'Shabbat l'Adon v'Kol, l'Atet Gedula l'Tzebreshi, shelo asanu kigoye haratzon, v'lo samanu k'mishpechot Adama, shelo samchachem l'chaim, v'gor aleinu k'chol amonam, v'anaknu korim, u'mishpachim u'modim, livnei melech, malchei hamlachim, HaKadosh Baruch Hu. ונאמר, והיה אדוני למלך על הארץ, ביום ההוא יהיה אדוני אחד, ושמו
This week we observed the yard sites of David Conrad, Larry Kozlov, Judy Stein, Nell Schoonerbeek, Fanny S. Fuller, Reuben Kamel, Henry Jake Stern, Samuel Brown, Lilia Cherkis Paper, Esther Devora Friedlander, and Ruth Lamensdorf. Is there anyone saying Kaddish for someone who they wish to remember now? The Mourner's Kaddish, page 598. Yitgadal v'yitkadash shmei Rabbah, v'yalma divra chirutei v'yamlich malchutei, v'chayechon u'v'yomechon u'v'chayei d'chol Beit Yisrael, ba'agala u'v'zman kariv imru amen. Yehei shmei Rabbah v'rach le'olam u'le'almei almaya. Yitbarach v'yishtabach v'yitpa'ar v'yitromam v'yitnaseh v'yithadar v'yitaleh v'yitalal shemei d'kudsha baruchu le'ela min kol birchata v'shirata tushbachata v'nechemata da'amiran bi'alma v'imru amen. Yehesh lama rabba min shemaya, v'chayim aleinu v'al kol Yisrael v'imru amen. Oseh shalom b'mromav, hu ya'aseh shalom, aleinu v'al kol Yisrael v'imru amen. May God, who established peace unto the heavens, grant peace unto us, all of Israel, and all of humankind, and let us say, Amen. You may be seated. Just a quick announcement. Tonight, Slichot services should be quite beautiful. We have Lieutenant Miles Garver, I'm sorry, Miles Garver, and Christopher Lovely will be joining us. That will be at 7 o'clock. We put out the call for individuals who to come and help us change the tour covers. We could use a little bit of help with that. After services, it's been a tradition here to change the Torah covers immediately following the Slichot service, and we'll continue to honor that tradition, but we could use some help. Just in terms of picking Torahs up, taking off the covers, putting the clasps on and all of that. We got 7 tours altogether, and it's hard for just a few people to do that. Okay, all right. Any other announcement? Religious schools tomorrow at 10 o'clock. Part of our preparation for the High Holy Days will be to work on a special Adon Olam. I know people in the main service are going to be jealous.
This is the
They're
first
gonna
year
be
we have a
jealous.
preschool, thanks to Cam.
Oh, yes, we have a
Added to the
preschool.
school.
That's right, yeah, we have
3 students.
Yep, we have a lovely preschool, and I think we have about 3 or 4 people now in the preschool. So we operate building slowly. Okay. Just a quick thing, Nate, how did your grandson do last night?
We got killed.
I don't care about the team, I care about how your grandson
Yeah, how
did.
he did.
Okay, you ready for this?
Ready.
He had 11 punts. That's every time we got the ball, we had a punt. And, however, none of them were returned.
Oh,
Okay.
I'm telling you, he's gonna get some offers.
He had 2 kickoffs, both of which went in the end zone.
Wow.
He had a 34-yard field goal and missed 50-yard. It was long enough, it was just to the right. It was 50 yards. 50 yards, you're excused.
He kicked the 50 yards, wow,
Wow.
He did.
but he got close.
Oh, yeah, no, he was real close. We had the right distance. But the team we played was, they're only ranked 2nd in the state of Alabama.
Oh, wow.
Ranked 23rd in the country.
Wow, 23.
Yeah, they killed us. Well, yeah, it wasn't in the game.
All right, Adon Olam, page 625.
Where? Page what?
Page 625. Adon Olam Asher Malach. That's too high, I'm sorry. Adon Olam Asher Malach, B'terem Kol Yitzir Nivram, Li'et Nasa V'chetzo Kol, Azai Melech Shemo Nikra, V'yacharei Kichlot HaKol, Levado Yimlok Noram, V'hu Haya V'hu Hover, V'hu Yia B'tifara. Adon Olam Asher Malach, B'terem Kol Yitzir Nivra, Li'et Nasa V'chetzo Kol, Azai Melech Shemo Nikra. V'hu echad v'yein sheni, v'hamshir lo li'akbira, b'li reshit, b'li tachlit, v'lo ha'oz v'hamisra. V'hu eli v'chai go'ali, v'tzur chevli b'yet tzara, v'hu nisi u'monos li, menat kosi b'yom ekra. Adon Olam Asher Malach, B'terem Kol Yitzir Nivra, Li'et Nasa בידו אפקיד רוחי, בהייתי שם ויעירה, ועם רוחי גביעתי, אדוני לי ולא אירא. אדון עולם אשר מלך, בטרם כל יציר נברא, ליד נשא וחפצו כל, אזי מלך שמו נקרא.
That was beautiful.
Shabbat shalom.
Shabbat shalom.
Shabbat shalom.
I love it.
Thank
That was
you.
beautiful.
Thank you.